Listen to that voice. It's not a grand instrument. It doesn't have the soaring power of an opera diva or the flawless bell-like clarity of her jazz contemporaries. It's a small voice with a limited range, often tinged with a delicate, weary rasp. And yet, it is arguably one of the most important, influential, and emotionally devastating instruments in the history of American music. It's a voice that contains multitudes, the joy of a first love, the bitterness of betrayal, the profound sorrow of injustice, and the defiant resilience of a soul that refused to be silenced. The woman behind that voice was born Eleanor Fagan, but the world would come to know her as Billie Holiday, or more intimately, as Lady Day. Her life was a relentless series of battles against poverty, against racism, against abuse, against addiction, and against the government itself. But her art was a transcendent act of alchemy. She took the raw, often brutal material of her own life and spun it into a sound that was pure, unvarnished truth. So the question is not just how she became a star, but something far more profound. How did a woman with a voice so technically limited, born into the harshest of circumstances, manage to channel the entire emotional experience of a century into her singing, and in doing so, change the very way we listen to music? To understand the voice, you must first understand the world that shaped it. Eleanor Fagan was born in Philadelphia in April 1915 and grew up in the grinding poverty of Baltimore, Maryland. This was a divided America. It was the era of Jim Crow, a system of brutal, institutionalized racism that governed the lives of African Americans, particularly in the South, but whose shadow extended across the entire nation. It was also the era of the Great Migration, a period when millions of black families were moving from the rural, agrarian South to the industrial cities of the North, searching for economic opportunity and a refuge from racial terror. They were chasing a dream, but often found themselves crowded into segregated neighborhoods, facing a different, more insidious kind of prejudice. Billie Holiday was a child of this tumultuous transition. Her mother, Sadie Fagan, was just a teenager herself when Billie was born. Her father, Clarence Holiday, was a talented and handsome banjo and guitar player who would go on to play with the famous Fletcher Henderson Orchestra. But he was a fleeting, almost mythical figure in his daughter's life, a traveling musician who was rarely present. Young Eleanora was left in the care of relatives, often shunted from one household to another. Her childhood was not a time of innocence. It was a crash course in survival. She was, in her own words, a woman when I was 6. She scrubbed the marble steps of white folks' homes in Baltimore, ran errands for the madams of local brothels, and learned early on that the world was a dangerous and unforgiving place, especially for a poor black girl. But amidst this hardship, a new sound was being born in the speakeasies and rent parties of cities like New York, Chicago, and Kansas City. It was called jazz. It was a music of innovation, of improvisation, of profound joy and deep sorrow. The blues. It was the soundtrack of the Harlem Renaissance, a cultural explosion that saw black writers, artists, and musicians creating revolutionary new forms of expression. And it was in the smoky, vibrant, and often dangerous world of Prohibition-era Harlem that a lonely, determined young girl named Eleanor Fagan would find her voice and invent a new identity for herself. Around 1929, a teenage Eleanor joined her mother in Harlem. Life was no easier here. The Great Depression was tightening its grip on the nation, and they struggled to make ends meet. It was during this desperate time that she made a decision that would change the course of her life. Drifting through the countless jazz clubs that dotted the Harlem landscape, she decided to try her hand at singing. According to legend, she first auditioned as a dancer, but when she failed spectacularly, the club owner, feeling sorry for her, asked if she could sing. She sang "Travelin' All Alone," and the noisy, rowdy club fell silent. The patrons and the owner heard something in her voice, a raw, emotional honesty that was impossible to ignore. She began singing in these small, smoky clubs for pennies a night. It was during this time that she shed the skin of Eleanor Fagan, a name associated with a childhood of pain and poverty. She adopted a new name, a name that signaled her aspirations and her parentage. She became Billie Holiday. Billie was borrowed from her favorite film star, the silent screen actress Billie Dove, a symbol of the glamour and beauty she yearned for. Holiday was a claim on her absent father, the musician Clarence Holiday. Her new name was a declaration. She was the daughter of music, and she was destined for stardom. In 1933, her destiny arrived in the form of a man named John Hammond. Hammond was a record producer and talent scout with an uncanny ear for authentic genius. He had already discovered artists like Count Basie and would later champion Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen. One night, he walked into a Harlem club called Monette's Supper Club and heard Billie Holiday sing. He was instantly mesmerized. He didn't hear a technically perfect voice, but he heard something far more important, a unique and devastatingly effective musical storyteller. He heard an artist who didn't just sing the notes, but inhabited the lyrics, transforming simple pop tunes into profound personal statements. Hammond arranged for her first recording sessions. At just 18 years old, she was in the studio with a band led by the clarinet virtuoso Benny Goodman. These early recordings from the 1930s are a revelation. Her voice is lighter, more optimistic than in her later, more famous work, but the signature style is already there. She had an innate, sophisticated sense of rhythm, a way of phrasing that was entirely her own. She would sing slightly behind the beat, a technique known as back phrasing, creating a feeling of relaxed conversational intimacy. She treated her voice like a jazz instrument, bending and shaping melodies to fit the emotional truth of the lyric. She was, in essence, inventing a new way to sing. Her career began to take off. By the mid-1930s, she was a rising star, recording with the finest jazz musicians of the day, including the legendary pianist Teddy Wilson. It was during these sessions that she met the man who would become the single most important musical and emotional partner of her life, the tenor saxophonist Lester Young. Their connection was immediate, profound, and almost telepathic. Young, a gentle, sensitive soul with a lyrical, floating style of playing, found in Billie a singer who understood his language. He nicknamed her Lady Day, a title that perfectly captured her innate elegance and regal bearing, despite her rough upbringing. She, in turn, nicknamed him Prez, short for the president of the tenor saxophone. Their musical conversations on record from this period are the stuff of legend. His saxophone doesn't just accompany her, it weaves around her voice, completing her thoughts, answering her phrases. It's the sound of two souls in perfect platonic harmony. Their friendship was a rare source of genuine, uncomplicated joy in her life. They were two sensitive artists who saw the world in the same melancholy, beautiful way, and they found a refuge in each other's company. In 1937, Billie Holiday achieved a new level of fame when she joined the Count Basie Orchestra, one of the most acclaimed big bands in the country. A year later, she broke racial barriers by becoming one of the first black female vocalists to tour with a white orchestra, led by the clarinetist Artie Shaw. This experience was a brutal education in the realities of American racism. Even as the star vocalist, the main attraction, whose name was on the marquee, she was subjected to constant humiliation. While her white bandmates stayed in comfortable hotels, she was often forced to find lodging in colored-only establishments. She had to use service entrances and back stairwells, and in many southern towns she was not allowed to sit on the bandstand with her own band, forced to wait backstage until it was her turn to sing. The experience left deep scars, hardening her resolve and fueling the deep well of pain from which she would draw for the rest of her career. It was in 1939, after leaving Artie Shaw's band, that Billie Holiday would record the song that would define her legacy and transform her from a jazz singer into a powerful voice of social protest. The song was Strange Fruit. The story behind it is as powerful as the song itself. It was not written by a jazz composer, but was adapted from a poem written by a Jewish school teacher, an activist from the Bronx named Abel Mirapol. The poem was a stark, horrifying depiction of a lynching in the American South, with its unforgettable imagery of black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Billie was performing at a club in Greenwich Village called Cafe Society, one of the first integrated nightclubs in New York City. The club's owner, Barney Josephson, showed her the poem. She was initially hesitant to perform it, fearing retaliation, but she felt its power and its truth. She developed a ritual for performing Strange Fruit that would become legendary. At the end of her set, all the waiters would stop service. The club would fall into complete pin-drop silence. All the lights would be turned off except for a single stark spotlight on her face. She would then sing the song, her eyes often closed, her voice stripped of all ornamentation, delivering the brutal lyrics with a quiet, devastating dignity. As the final haunting notes faded, the spotlight would go out, plunging the room into total darkness. When the lights came back up, the stage would be empty. She was gone. There was no encore. The song was a cultural earthquake. It was a direct, unflinching confrontation with the reality of American racial terrorism at a time when such things were never discussed in popular music. Her record label, Columbia, refused to record it, fearing the controversy, so she recorded it for a small, independent label, Commodore Records. Strange Fruit became her signature song. It elevated her from an entertainer to an artist of immense social importance, but it also put her in the crosshairs of powerful enemies who saw her and her song as a dangerous threat to the status quo. As her artistry reached its peak, Billie's personal life was spiraling into a vortex of addiction and abuse. The hardships of her childhood and the constant racism she endured on the road had taken their toll. She sought solace in alcohol, marijuana, and by the early 1940s, heroin. Her romantic relationships were often as destructive as her addictions. She was drawn to men who mistreated her, who took her money, and subjected her to physical and emotional abuse. Her tumultuous marriages to men like Jimmy Monroe and Louis McKay were a painful cycle of dependency and violence. Her addiction became an open secret in the jazz world, and it began to affect her career. She was unreliable, sometimes showing up late for gigs or not at all. But more tragically, it began to ravage her most precious asset, her voice. The light, fluid instrument of her youth began to deepen and fray, acquiring the scarred, world-weary texture that would define her later recordings. To some, this change was a tragedy, a loss of her youthful brilliance, but to others, the damage only added a new layer of profound, heartbreaking authenticity. Her voice now sounded like it had lived through the pain she was singing about. The performance of Strange Fruit had made her a powerful symbol of Black resilience, but it had also made her a target. The man who targeted her was Harry J. Anslinger, the formidable and deeply racist head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Anslinger was a crusading moralist who believed that jazz music was a corrupting influence on the youth of America, and he saw drug-addicted black jazz musicians as a primary threat. He launched a relentless multi-year crusade to destroy Billie Holiday. He saw her as the ultimate symbol of this degenerate culture, and he was determined to make an example of her. His agents pursued her, tapped her phones, and used informants to build a case against her. In 1947, they succeeded. Billie was arrested for narcotics possession in Philadelphia and sentenced to a year and a day in a federal prison in Alderson, West Virginia. When she was released, she discovered another, crueler form of punishment. Due to her felony conviction, she was stripped of her New York City cabaret card, a license that was required for any artist to perform in a venue that served alcohol. This meant she was effectively banned from performing in the jazz clubs of New York City, the very places where she had built her career. She was forced to play in concert halls and theaters, but the intimate connection she shared with an audience in a small, smoky club was lost. It was a calculated move by Anslinger, designed not just to punish her, but to silence her. Despite the immense weight of her struggles, the woman known as Lady Day was not just a tragic figure. She was a complex, vibrant, and often fiercely funny human being. Her friends remembered her incredible generosity. She was notorious for giving away her last dollar to someone in need. They also remembered her sharp wit and her explosive temper. She was a woman of profound contradictions. On stage, she projected an image of regal elegance and heartbreaking vulnerability. One of the most iconic elements of this persona was the white gardenia she almost always wore in her hair. The story behind it reveals her resourcefulness and her show business savvy. Before one of her early performances, she accidentally burned a section of her hair with a hot curling iron. To cover the spot, her friend grabbed a fresh gardenia from a flower stand, and a legend was born. It was a beautiful solution to a clumsy accident, a perfect metaphor for her ability to create beauty out of damage. Her most profound and sustaining relationship remained her deep platonic love for the saxophonist Lester Young. Their friendship was a rare island of safety and mutual understanding in the turbulent seas of their lives. They were two gentle, sensitive souls who spoke the same musical and emotional language. When they performed together, it was less a singer and an accompanist, and more a conversation between two equals. Anecdotes abound of their almost telepathic connection on the bandstand. Billie would sing a phrase and Prez would answer with a saxophone line that felt like its perfect unspoken conclusion. His death in March of 1959, just a few months before her own, was a devastating blow from which she never truly recovered. It's also important to consider the myth she herself helped to create. In 1956, she published her autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues. The book is a powerful, raw, and brutally honest account of her life. It is also, factually speaking, highly unreliable. It is filled with embellished stories, rearranged timelines, and outright fabrications. But to dismiss it as untrue is to miss the point. The book is a work of profound emotional truth. It is the story of her life as she felt it, a narrative shaped by the logic of trauma, not the strictures of chronology. It is a key part of the myth of Billie Holiday, a myth she consciously participated in creating, a way of taking control of her own story, even if it meant bending the facts to fit the narrative. The final years of Billie Holiday's life were a slow, painful decline. Decades of alcohol and drug abuse had ravaged her body. Her once luminous beauty had faded, replaced by a gaunt, weary visage. Her voice, once so fluid, was now a fragile, broken instrument. Yet, even in this state of physical decay, she was capable of producing music of almost unbearable power. Her final albums, recorded for the Verve label, are difficult but essential listening. The voice is scarred and weathered, but the emotional insight is sharper than ever. When she sings a song like Don't Explain, a song she co-wrote about a cheating lover, you're not just hearing a performance. You are hearing a lifetime of pain, forgiveness, and weary resignation, distilled into 3 minutes of devastating art. In the spring of 1959, her body finally gave out. She collapsed and was admitted to Metropolitan Hospital in New York, diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver. But even here, on her deathbed, the forces that had hounded her for years would not let her be. While she lay gravely ill, her hospital room was raided by police officers from Harry Anslinger's Federal Bureau of Narcotics. They claimed to have found a small amount of heroin. They arrested her, fingerprinted her, and stationed a police guard outside her door, ensuring that even in her final hours, she was a prisoner. It was the last cruel act in a lifetime of persecution. On July 17, 1959, Billie Holiday died. She was just 44 years old. She reportedly had only 70 cents in her bank account. A life that had generated so much beauty and so much income for others had left her with virtually nothing. So what is the ultimate significance of Billie Holiday? What is her legacy? Musically, it is immeasurable. She fundamentally changed the art of popular singing. She proved that emotional truth was more powerful than technical perfection. She treated her voice like a jazz instrument and lyrics like sacred texts. Every singer who came after her, from Frank Sinatra, who openly credited her as his greatest influence, to modern artists across every genre who prioritize emotional delivery, owes a debt to Lady Day. She created a new language of vulnerability and authenticity in song. But her importance extends far beyond the world of music. With her performance of Strange Fruit, she became an unwitting but powerful civil rights icon. At a time when speaking out against racial injustice was a dangerous and often fatal act, she used her platform to sing a song that was an unvarnished indictment of American racism. The song became an anthem for the burgeoning civil rights movement, a haunting reminder of the terror of lynching, and a testament to the power of art to bear witness to unspeakable truths. In the end, the story of Billie Holiday is the story of a profound and painful paradox. Her life was a near constant litany of suffering, a journey through the darkest corridors of American society. Yet, her art was an act of luminous, defiant grace. She took the ugliness she was given, the poverty, the racism, the abuse, the addiction, and transformed it into a body of work that is achingly, exquisitely beautiful. She didn't just sing songs, she lived them, and in doing so, she gave a voice to the voiceless and offered a strange kind of comfort to anyone who has ever known heartbreak or sorrow. The woman, Eleanor Fagan, is long gone, but Lady Day and that singular, scarred, and immortal voice will sing forever. And that's all for today's video. Don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe so you'll always be in the loop. Thanks for watching.